I was just a kid, around 8 years old, when I saw my mom for the last time. We used to live in this big old house way out in the country, far away from any towns or neighbors. One night, I was jolted awake by these weird sounds, like cries or muffled screams, coming from inside the walls. I yelled out for my mom, and she rushed in, looking all panicked. But even though the noises kept going, she acted like she could not hear a thing. She hit the walls with her hands and shouted for whatever was in there to stop, telling them to leave me alone and let me sleep. And strangely enough, the noise stopped right after she did that. A few days later, I was in the shower, just turning on the water like any other time. But instead of water, this burning hot, thick liquid, blood, of all things, started spraying out of the showerhead. It was so hot, it scalded my skin, and I screamed in pain and shock. My mom came running and dragged me out of the shower, wrapping me up in a towel. That white towel quickly turned red as she wiped off the blood that had covered my body. A week later, I was back in the bathroom to brush my teeth, and that was when the light above me started flickering. Every time it went dark for just a second, I saw someone, staring at me from the mirror. He was a gaunt, pale man, like he had been starving for days. When the light finally stayed on, I tried to convince myself I imagined it. But then, right there on the glass, a bloody handprint appeared. It was the last weekend before school was about to start. I was lying in bed, probably dozing off for a bit, when I heard my closet door creak open. Inside, I saw a woman standing there. She looked pale and thin, just like the man from the mirror. At first, I could not make out what I was looking at, it was dark. But then, she rushed at me, jumped on my bed, and started strangling me with her icy hands. She was screaming at me, saying I had killed her husband. I could barely breathe when, suddenly, my mom stormed into the room, swinging an axe. She struck the woman, and her head came flying off, landing right in my lap. I was screaming, terrified, but my mom just shushed me. "There is something I need to show you," she said, calm as ever. She grabbed my hand and led me into the closet. There was a narrow passage behind the clothes, a tunnel that connected all the rooms in the house from behind the walls. What I saw in there, I cannot remember clearly. It is all blurry now, like I blocked it out. But I do remember following her down into a hidden basement, not the main one, but another one, secret, tucked underneath. She said things to me down there that I would rather forget. I do not want to repeat her exact words, but I know she was angry and disappointed, telling me I should have stayed quiet, like a good boy. I do not understand why she said or did what she did. She turned on me, biting into my neck, then my shoulder, tearing into my flesh like some wild animal. She kept biting and pulling chunks of skin from my arm as I screamed and begged her to stop. In movies, this is the part where someone shows up just in time, maybe a cop or a family friend, to save the day. But that did not happen for me. The only reason I am still alive is that something in her snapped. For whatever reason, she let go. Her voice softened, and she apologized like none of it had just happened. I was lying there, bleeding, barely able to breathe, looking at the open wounds she left on me. She calmly walked over to the phone and called 911. I remember hearing her tell them everything, about all the people she had killed, about how I was lying there on the edge of death. She warned them that if they did not arrive in time, she would finish me off. The cops got there about 15 minutes later. They arrested her and took me to the hospital. It was not until years later, in my 20s, that I learned the full story. Even then, none of it made sense to me. The voices I had heard in the walls? They belonged to the people my mom had killed and stuffed into the walls, covering them with their skin. The blood in the shower? That came from the bodies she had used to repair the plumbing. She thought if she made the water hot enough, the bodies would eventually dissolve. As for the mirror, it was two-way glass. There was someone on the other side, watching me. The flickering light? That was just a faulty bulb. The woman who attacked me from the closet? She had gone mad from starvation. She thought I was helping my mom with everything. To this day, I still cannot make sense of why my mom did what she did. The police could not figure it out either. There was no logical explanation. The only way I have been able to cope with it all is to tell myself that the house was haunted, that something evil had possessed her. It is the only way I have been able to keep moving forward. I used to be a cop, but I gave it all up after one night that I still cannot quite make sense of. I was never one to believe in the supernatural. I did not think much of ghost stories or anything like that. My whole life, I trusted what I could see, touch, and hear. But then, one night on the job, everything changed for me. Let me be clear, I did not quit because of a few creaky floors or shadows moving in the dark. No, it took a lot more than that to scare me off. What I went through was something that will stick with me forever, and I am sharing it now because the case is no longer classified, and I want people to know the truth. It all started on a quiet night. Dispatch called my partner and me to check out a noise complaint in a small, sleepy neighborhood. You know the type. Everyone goes to bed early, and nothing much happens. We were a couple of hours past midnight when we pulled up to the house. I will call my partner John, and you can call me Steve. We stepped out of the cruiser, the air was still, and the street was silent. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like something is just a little bit off. We knocked on the front door. Police! Anybody home? I called out. The door creaked open, and there stood a little girl, no more than 9 years old, peeking out through the gap. I knelt down so I would not seem too scary and said, "Hi there. Is anyone else home with you?" She just shook her head, not saying a word. At first, I figured she might have been making the noise herself, maybe left the TV on too loud or something like that, and the neighbors had complained. But before I could tell her to turn it down and get back to bed, we both heard it. The sound of dishes crashing from what I guessed was the kitchen. Now, the house was dark, barely any light inside, and that girl had already told me she was alone. That meant someone else had to be in there. Whoever was making that noise was not supposed to be. I told the girl to step outside, and I looked at John. "Hey John, why do not you let her have one of those candies you are always munching on?" He gave me that look, but the girl smiled. They waited by the car while I pushed the door open a little further. "Police! If someone is in here, make yourself known!" I shouted again. No answer. But I was not about to barge in without cause. I had no warrant and no real reason to go snooping around. Still, I stayed alert, watching the house from the doorway. I headed back to the girl and John. "Hey there," I said. "I did not catch your name. What do folks call you?" "Sarah," she said softly. "That is a pretty name, Sarah. Mind if I ask where your folks are?" Right as the words left my mouth, the TV inside turned on, blaring static at full volume. The noise startled both John and me, and we turned to see the flickering screen lighting up the living room from where we stood outside. We put Sarah in the back seat of our cruiser to keep her safe, then stepped inside the house to check things out. The lights were not working, no matter what switches we tried. It was dark, cold, and had a strange vibe I could not shake. As we moved through the house, something weird started happening. I kept seeing someone in the mirrors, just out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was John at first, but every time I looked, no one was there. We finally made our way back toward the front of the house, feeling on edge when all of a sudden, we heard footsteps. Loud, running footsteps, like someone sprinting right at us. We drew our guns, aimed them down the hallway, but there was nothing there. The sound got closer and closer, and just when I thought whoever it was would come barreling down the hallway, the footsteps stopped. Then, everything in the room started flying. Lamps, chairs, anything not bolted down was thrown around like there was a storm raging through the place, even though the air was dead still. We got the hell out of there and ran into the front yard, catching our breath. Out of nowhere, the siren on our cruiser went off, blaring into the night. I ran over and turned it off, shaking my head. "You good, John?" I asked. He was pale as a ghost, but trying to keep it together. He unwrapped one of his candy sticks and popped it in his mouth. Yeah, he muttered. I am all right. I checked on Sarah in the back seat. You doing okay? I asked. She nodded, but she seemed way too calm for a kid who just saw all that. John was staring back at the house. Steve, something's not adding up, he said. What do you mean? He turned to me, dead serious. Did you see any pictures of her inside? On the walls, with the family photos? I thought back. There were plenty of photos hanging on the walls, but none of them had Sarah in them. Now that you mention it, no. I did not see her in any of them. Exactly. Something is off about this whole thing. The footsteps led outside, right? Then the car siren goes off. What are the odds? So, what are you saying, John? You think Sarah is haunted? I do not know, man, but I know what I saw, and it was not normal. We took her outside, the TV goes nuts. I see figures in the mirrors that are not there. Something invisible was in there throwing furniture. You tell me. I did not want to admit it, but I could not come up with a better explanation. It all sounded insane, but it was making too much sense. John headed back toward the house. Wait, where are you going? I asked. It shows up in the mirrors, he said. That is the only way to see it. Reluctantly, I followed him inside. John grabbed a book off the table and smashed one of the mirrors. What the hell, man? I yelled. This is someone's house. He handed me a piece of broken glass and said, Come on, Steve. You have got a better idea? We are dealing with something out of this world here. We shined our flashlights into the glass, scanning the house. I was praying nothing would show up. But then it did. Out of nowhere, this thing, red, bony, and fast, slashed at me, cutting right through my uniform. I hit the ground hard, dropping the shard of glass as I felt it tear into my back. I tried to get away, but it kept clawing at me until John fired his weapon. The thing screeched and vanished. John helped me up, and we ran outside, but Sarah was gone. We reported everything to the department, but without any evidence, no footage from the patrol car, no witnesses. It was a tough sell. The cameras, which we had hoped would back up our story, had mysteriously turned off as soon as we entered the house. But one part of our story did raise eyebrows: the missing girl. Our captain pulled up an old missing persons case. It was Sarah. She had disappeared years before. I resigned a few days later. After all that, I just could not keep doing the job. My advice to anyone reading this? If something strange happens in your home, doors opening, things moving on their own, do not just brush it off. You never know what might be lurking. Growing up, I always felt like I did not quite fit in with the rest of my family. Being the youngest of three, I was always the odd one out. I never looked or acted much like my siblings, and they never missed a chance to remind me of that, teasing me about being adopted. I had always brushed it off as harmless sibling banter. For the most part, life at home was fine, maybe even a little bright compared to some. My parents seemed caring, and my siblings mostly left me alone. But lately, things have started to feel off. It all started a couple of months ago when my dog got hit by a car. I came home that day, and my mom was waiting for me right at the front door, like she knew what was coming. She told me my dog had been killed, hit by a speeding car. She hugged me, and at first, I believed her sadness was real. But then, as I walked away, I saw her reflection in the hallway mirror. What I saw chilled me to my core. She had this smile on her face, something dark and twisted, like she was actually pleased with the news she had just delivered. Her eyes had this strange, almost gleeful look. I turned around immediately to check, and there she was, her expression completely changed, full of sympathy again. She asked if I was all right, and I just nodded, though deep down, I felt this knot in my stomach that would not go away. I convinced myself that I was just seeing things because I was upset. But now I wonder if that was the first sign. A couple of weeks later, something else strange happened. I was making lunch in the kitchen, slicing tomatoes for a sandwich, when I accidentally cut my hand with the knife. I quickly grabbed a towel to cover the cut and ran to the bathroom to clean it up. After bandaging my hand, I returned to the kitchen, but something was wrong. Where I had spilled a few drops of blood on the counter, it was all gone, completely cleaned up. There was just a small, damp spot, like someone had wiped it down. My sister, Jenny, was there, casually pouring herself a glass of juice. I asked her if she had cleaned up the blood, and she just smiled and said she had grabbed the knife to put it in the sink. But then I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. There was a faint smear of blood on her finger. I do not know why, but the thought crossed my mind that she had not wiped the blood away at all. Maybe she had licked it off. I quickly glanced at the kitchen rag. It was bone dry. The knife in the sink had no blood on it either. The rest of that day, I could feel Jenny's eyes on me, watching me, and I could not shake the creeping feeling that something was very wrong. Then there was the way my parents started acting. For as long as I could remember, they were never the type to joke about dark or morbid things. But suddenly, they found it hilarious to make up these crazy, disturbing scenarios about me dying in horrific ways. They would laugh together, loud and unsettling, while describing the most detailed and violent scenes where I met some gruesome end. It made me sick. When I told them it bothered me, they just waved it off, saying they were only kidding and that they loved me. But their laughter felt different, like it was not even real. Lately, I have also noticed my mom and sisters spending a lot more time talking in hushed tones behind closed doors. If I accidentally walked in, they would all fall silent and just stare at me until I left. My mom even yelled at me once to leave them alone when I interrupted one of their talks. She apologized later, but her apology felt hollow, like she was just saying it because she had to. Sometimes, when she says sorry, there is this odd glint in her eyes, almost like she is enjoying herself. It has gotten to the point where I feel like a stranger in my own home, like I do not belong here anymore. It is hard to explain, but it feels like there is something lurking beneath the surface, something they are hiding from me. The worst thing happened just last night, and I am not sure I can stay here anymore. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I heard strange noises coming from downstairs. I got up and quietly made my way down the stairs, curious and scared at the same time. What I saw left me frozen in place. In the middle of the living room, my parents and sisters were sitting in a tight circle. The only light in the room came from a few flickering candles placed around them. At first, I thought they were praying, but it was not like any prayer I had ever seen. My mom was chanting something low and rhythmic, in a language I did not recognize. My dad and sister sat there, swaying, muttering softly under their breath, their eyes shut tight. I stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. We have never been a religious family, so whatever this was, it was new and terrifying. My mom's chanting got louder and louder until it felt like the whole room was vibrating with her voice. Then, all at once, the candles went out, leaving me in total darkness. I felt something shift, like the air had grown heavier. Suddenly, I had this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. My heart raced as I turned to leave, but before I could move, my mom was standing right in front of me. Her eyes, they were not normal. They were completely black, and her voice, it was deep, almost like a man's. "What are you doing up, sweetie?" she asked, her voice smooth and eerie. "You should be in bed." I was too scared to respond. My body would not move, my throat felt tight, and all I could do was stand there shaking. Then, out of nowhere, she let out a blood-curdling scream. "Go to bed!" The sound of it was so loud and so terrifying that I blacked out. When I came to, it was morning, and I was in my own bed. Sunlight was pouring in through the window, and downstairs, I could hear my mom and sisters laughing over breakfast, like nothing had happened. I do not know if what I saw was real or if I am losing my mind, but one thing is clear: I am not safe here. I feel like they are planning something, and I do not want to stick around long enough to find out what. I am scared that they are going to hurt me, or worse.